This is Sean Green here to talk with Howard Lederer about some recent pro-poker legislation that got shot down, as well as what is on the horizon for poker's legal future and what you can do to help. Lederer is a board member of the Poker Players Alliance, a poker advocacy group bent on legalizing poker and promoting the game we love. So first off, the most recent legislation to go down was H.R. 5767, which had to do with it was Barney Frank, and he was really just kind of trying to combat the entire UIGEA crackdown on the financial institutions. So can you kind of give us an overview on what that was really about?
Yeah. Barney Frank is chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, so he is tasked with oversight on the banks and the banking industry. Obviously, this is a year where the banking industry has a lot on their plate. They have a lot of burdens. They're having a lot of issues. They're having to raise a lot of capital just to stay afloat. The UIGEA, because it chose not to define what illegal online gambling was, the law was originally written to look to the regulators to do that. What Barney Frank saw in the proposed rule that was sent out in October, kind of like a, hey, here's what we're thinking about doing in terms of the rule. He also noticed, and of course we all noticed at the PPA, that the regulators chose not to define what illegal online gambling is. So now you have this law that proposes a severe penalty to any bank that would process an illegal online gambling transactions, but it doesn't tell them what those things are. So what Barney's bill basically says is, here's this tremendous burden that we're about to place on a banking industry that is breaking right now, and that this is a matter of almost national security here, that we need to create very clear definitions for the banks of what an illegal online gambling transaction is. And so when you look at the bill and also the proposed King Amendment, which was introduced yesterday, it would create a process whereby that would happen. And we know that's a complicated process and it's not easy. But just because a regulation isn't easy doesn't mean that it isn't an obligation of the regulators to actually go through that process to take the burden off the banks. And basically that's what Barney was trying to do yesterday.
So it was really just about defining what illegal online gambling was, which doesn't necessarily shoot down the UIGEA. All it does is it almost helps it along, but in another way it sheds light on the fact that it's kind of a futile and it's partially impossible task to complete.
Well, certainly the regulations as proposed and the law itself is unworkable and unenforceable. Except for the Wire Act, which the highest court in the land has ruled only applies to sports. So we know about sports, but there's a lot of other stuff on the internet, from casino games to poker to the so-called skill games. There aren't federal laws, and so the UIGEA basically leaves it up to all these local laws, which state and local laws, which don't necessarily even apply to the internet. It's a very complicated web of international, federal, state, local. It's very complicated, and to ask a bank to figure it out without any help from the government, but the government says if you get it wrong, we might throw you in jail. That's just absurd. There's just no way for an industry to be able to operate, and it would be a tremendous burden. And we know what the practical consequence would be. These are banks. These are conservative institutions, and they're just simply going to block everything. And a bill that tried to dress itself up as this is all about states' rights, and we're not trying to create a federal law here because we're looking to all the state laws. We're going to have people in states where it's clearly legal to play poker not able to play poker because banks aren't going to take the chance.
Right. Well, and this legislation was still very much in its preliminary stages as well, so it almost didn't even get a fair chance. It was a 32-32 vote. It was heartbreakingly close to passing and getting some legs. So, I mean, why do you think it is that people are still opposed to even this kind of thing? Like, what was it that was scaring them away from it?
Okay, well, first of all, I mean, let's look at the good. And there wasn't a lot of good, okay, but there was some good yesterday. I don't believe that in the history, or at least the recent history, the internet history of Congress, that there's been a piece of legislation that would further our cause as online poker players that was even a close vote. We've always been crushed. Okay, so we had a 30-32 defeat yesterday, and it was a defeat. You really can't even call it a tie vote. But this is so in some ways it's our best vote ever, but it was also tremendously disappointing because we were expecting to win, quite frankly. We had a number of members of that committee that switched their vote late. And they switched their vote because, quite frankly, they were strong-armed by Spencer Bacchus, the ranking Republican member of the committee, who really resorted to untruths and emotion. We heard outrageous claims yesterday. We heard that 1/3 of underage internet gamblers try to commit suicide. It's just there's never been a study. I mean, this is just an outrageous claim. He was
a stat out of nowhere. Almost.
It was just a stat out of nowhere. He, you know, of course, he brought up the internet gambling as the crack cocaine, which actually is a quote from a guy who was talking about a very specific thing. It has nothing to do with the internet. He was talking about video terminals, basically video machines in betting parlors and in casinos as being the crack cocaine of gambling. Has nothing to do with internet gambling and certainly nothing to do with internet poker. But again, you have to understand, members of Congress, they get, you know, the idea of internet poker, I think a lot of them think it is like video poker.
Right.
You know, they don't get that it's a different thing. You know, I've been able to sit down with some members of Congress and it's like, they go, oh, you mean you play poker against other people? It's not a casino game. This is an education process that the PPA has been trying to go through. He also threw out there, he basically tried to tie internet gambling to child pornography. I'm not quite sure how he was connecting the dots there, but he was just throwing out one sort of emotional plea after another, and then he essentially threatened these people sort of in the back rooms, you know, with you know, party hardship, and just told them to get in line with his party. And there were just a lot of votes that switched that caused the tie. It was very disappointing, but I think it highlights for us as poker players that this is an emotional, heated issue, and that we have, you know, essentially a party in the Republican Party that still thinks it needs to listen to and sort of, you know, heed the wishes of a very radical portion of our society that in my opinion is losing its relevance. You know, the right-wing Christian coalition types, the focus on the family types, I think are a danger to this country. They claim to love America, but I think they actually hate America. They hate an America where people have a choice to play poker, where gays can get married, where there's, you know, a wide range of religions, or those that choose not to have religion in their life. They want an America where everyone, you know, believes in their imaginary little friend, and where everyone, you know, is completely moral by their moral, you know, by their moral playbook. And you know, quite frankly, I think poker players need to get out there. They need to vote this kind of influence out of government. You know, in some ways, yesterday's vote, I think, was a microcosm of what has been hurting this country for a long time. When you look at 2000 and 2004, and even dating back to the 1980s, the religious right has had a tremendous influence in politics. And they've done it by narrowly, just by razor-thin margins, narrowly electing, presidents and members of Congress and members of the Senate. And very often but the problem is because these are narrow, very, very, thinly divided elections, the people that do win these razor-thin margins tend to truly overappreciate the Christian right in getting them elected, because they know that if they didn't have that vote, that they would not have won those elections. And this wing of our society, or wingnut of our society, as I'd like to call them, they have had a tremendous influence over the Supreme Court and over just a wide range of sort of political issues. And I think it's really damaged our country. I think we can see that the last 8 years haven't gone so well, I think, sort of politically, policy-wise. And I think the fight over internet gambling certainly sort of highlights that. They aren't for freedom. They aren't for freedom of choice. They want to tell us how to live our lives. I think Americans value, one of the highest, most important questions, I was just reading an article last night about happiness. And there are international groups that are now starting to incorporate happiness indexes when they look at various societies. And they try and correlate those things to wealth and a whole bunch of other things. Health, of course. Maybe at the top of the list is freedom. People who are free to make their own decisions and their own mistakes are the happiest in the world. And again, this wing of the Republican Party wouldn't want to give people their freedom. People are free to be like they are, but if you're different, they don't want you to have your freedom. And this is a very important fight. But the thing is this may be a narrow block of our society or a not so narrow block of our society, but they're very motivated. And they had 6 days to prepare. Focus on the Family sent out an alert. I'm sure that the Focus on the Family types were out there really pounding the grassroots, and some of these votes that quite frankly we were expecting to vote on our side of this issue did change at the end. I think it took a combination of that grassroots work and quite frankly an extraordinary effort by Spencer Backus to intimidate members of his party to vote his way on this issue. But these are the tactics that we should come to expect. We shouldn't expect truth. We shouldn't expect rationality. We should expect something that is very emotional and actually quite damaging, I think. At the end of the day, if these regulations do get promulgated, they're going to damage our financial system. They're going to put burdens on our banking system that are, that quite frankly could break some banks in terms of the costs and in terms of the things that they're going to have to do to try and implement these things. And so instead of having a rational sort of discussion and actually creating rational policy, you had a group that were willing to submarine the banking industry so that they could curry favor with an extreme part of this country that quite frankly doesn't really, I don't think they vote the gambling issue that much anyway. That's they vote on abortion, they vote on gay marriage, right. They vote on other things, but for some reason they feel like this gambling issue is something that matters.
It's still something that matters to that fringe group.
And quite frankly, what we have to do, this really highlights what we have to do in November. I think poker players have to realize that we do not have a home in the Republican Party. As much as you may think you do, I just don't feel like we do right now. And I think yesterday's vote really highlighted that. And we have to marginalize this group. And we have to make sure that there are as few Republicans as possible in Congress.
Well, and this isn't to off-put any Republican viewers either, I'm sure, just because I would assume at least a very good proportion, probably half of the poker players out there are Republicans and proud Republicans. I think the point you're making is that the Republican officials that are getting elected recently aren't reflecting their views, though, especially on these extreme issues.
Exactly. You can be a Republican, but on this issue, your party doesn't have a home for you right now.
And if this is one of your most important issues.
And I believe that there were rational, moderate members of the Republican Party on that committee yesterday who may not really believe much about this issue, or at least the emotional side of it, the Spencer Bacchus side of this issue, and they probably believed in the banking issue. They fell into line with that wing of their party yesterday, and they voted that way. Whether they really believed in this issue or not, at the end of the day, it was party discipline of many Republicans who are moderate. And so if you have a party where the moderate members of your party are willing to vote probably against their real beliefs
and towards the extremes
for political expediency, I think that party has a problem as far as we're concerned, as far as poker players, as far as this issue is concerned.
Okay. And you had touched upon something earlier about needing to educate a vast number of people, especially the people in power, about what poker really is and what it is not. How can just normal members of the PPA go about helping to do that?
Well, certainly the PPA is going to be sending out alerts to, particularly to its members who are in those districts of the committee members who voted against us. We need to have our voice heard before November, talking to the members of Congress who have not been with us, and also thanking the members of Congress who have been with us. We need to make sure that our voice is heard and that they feel like our issue is important to us, and that not only do they believe in our issue, but that they realize that there is political capital to be gained by being on our side of the issue. And the way we do that is by making our voice heard at the grassroots. When you get an email from the PPA saying, hey, we've got a vote coming up in a couple of days, you need to contact your member of Congress. This is important. You need to do it. Because I'll tell you what, the focus on the family types did it. And I think they may have outdone us. And the PPA can send out all the emails in the world. We can't make people pick up the phone. Right? So this is a matter of motivation, and we have to show Congress that we're as motivated as the other side. And maybe we're not as crazy motivated like they are, because I really think that they just start, I think they're thinking about eternal damnation here. I think some of these people actually believe that they're maybe saving us from ourselves, and that's a pretty big motivator. I think it's, as much as I'd like to think that the American way of life and freedom of choice is something important, it's kind of hard to stack that up against eternal damnation. So we know the other side is motivated by a lot of rhetoric and a lot of emotional thinking. And we need to get emotional about our country and about the American way of life here. And this is an issue that actually, 5-6 years ago, who would have ever thought that we'd be kind of at the center of an issue that I think really starts going way beyond poker itself. This is about freedom in our society and freedom on the internet. And it's very important. And I think we need to be motivated as an organization.
Okay. Well, now there are quite a few pro-poker bills out there. Like one of them is the Skill Protection Act, which I'm sure you've heard of. You actually briefly mentioned it before as well. They aren't gaining a lot of steam. They aren't gaining a lot of traction. And it's kind of come as expected they wouldn't gain a lot of traction. Do you, especially for like the Skill Game Act, do you think that trying to designate poker as a game of skill is the right direction to go?
Absolutely. Okay, first of all, let's look at the history of this issue. The anti-gambling faction, they got started back in 1998. Okay, it took them to 2006 to get something passed. They were defeated year in and year out. Okay, yes, sometimes they get something passed here, something passed there, but they always got stopped, somewhere along the way. It took them a while to build the right coalition, get the right guy in office, president, who would sign the bill, and then it took the leader, the leader of the Senate, who had, talk about crazy aspirations. This guy thought he could be president. Bill Frist thought he could be president, and by passing the UIGEA would help solidify the support of Jim Leach, who didn't even win his seat, so that he could win the Iowa caucuses. Trust me, you can trace back the UIGEA to the fact that Bill Frist wanted to win the Iowa caucuses. As crazy, look, you just had to look into the guy's eyes, right? No one was going to have him as our president. The idea of having him with the button is just scary. So, it just took this combination of events to get the UIGA passed in the first place. It's going to take a little bit of work on our part, and we realize that 2008 is certainly not the year that we're going to get something passed. So I think Barney's effort yesterday was to at very least make sure that the most damaging part of the UIGEA, these regulations that are going to put undue burden on the banks, didn't happen. And hopefully in a new administration, hopefully an Obama administration, you know, I mean, Obama is a poker fan. He understands that poker's a game of skill. We'll have the right guy in office. We'll hopefully have a Senate and a House that are even more Democrat than they are now. I think that's when you start trying to move one of these bills. And I'm not sure which one will move. You know, Barney's bill, it's certainly much more, you know, wide-reaching, would create more choice for more people. So in a lot of ways, I like Barney's bill more. But I think it's also going to be more difficult to move that bill. I think members of Congress, when I've sat down with them, and very often I think they're cold to the idea, and then when you make it clear, we're just talking about poker and bridge and clearly games where people aren't playing against the house, they're playing against each other, and they're playing skill games, kind of the light bulb turns on. And I mean, I've had people that I don't think, you know, I think they were just giving me some of their time, but not really thinking like they'd ever support anything like that. And by the end of the conversation, they get it. They get the difference between poker and blackjack.
But then you have situations like, I know that, I think it was Bob Schiaffoni testified in a case, in a trial about how poker was a game of skill, and then you had another person give just a simple example of how a 1% chance hand ended up going in favor of the underdog, and that was what swung it, and that was all there was to it. I mean, it seems like people just aren't hearing it. So how do we get it out there?
So, you know,
what's the best example that it's a skill game?
we can talk, well, I mean, certainly the best example, I think in that particular case, the wrong example, and that wasn't Bob Schiaffoni. I believe it was either Roy West or Roy Cook. I know it was a Roy.
Okay.
But I believe that that expert testimony is just centered around the fact that this player was a winner over a long period of time, so it had to be a skill game, and how you take reads and you make these things. I don't think the argument was properly presented for a court in terms of true evidence, but there is evidence out there. And I think the best piece of evidence that poker is a game of skill is really, if you ask the question, what causes someone to win a hand of poker? Is it the cards or is it the betting? Okay, and we would argue that the betting is the skill part of the game, and the cards and the random distribution and the turning and the vagaries that the cards can create in a hand is the luck. And when you look at Hold'em, 82% of Hold'em hands, this is a fact that actually shocked me when I saw the number, 82% of Hold'em hands end without a showdown. Okay, so 82% of the time,
the cards don't matter.
The cards don't matter. We don't look at the cards. We don't look at the whole cards. We don't look at anything. Someone's pushed the pot because they bet, and everyone else folded. Right there, that's the end of the argument for me. Okay, if you're trying to determine which is more important, and that's the test in a vast majority of states, is, you know, what's the predominant factor in determining the winner of a poker hand? Is it the skill or the betting, or is it the cards or the luck? And it's a 50-50 proposition. Well, it's 82-18 at best for the luck side. So, you know, we're talking about 82% of the time the skill determines the winner of a hand. So that argument's never been presented in a court of law, and I think when the right case comes up and that argument is made, I think we're going to win.
So we just need to get you subpoenaed in a courtroom to be able to say that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're looking forward to get subpoenaed.
Right.
Well, the last question that I have for you is, you've mentioned how PPA members and just poker players in general can get active and get involved, and that's by calling or writing their congresspeople. Are there any more creative ways or even more involved ways that they can make their voices heard?
Well, you know, some of the most effective meetings that the PPA has had are in-district meetings. You know, so we go to Washington all the time. We meet with members of Congress in their Washington offices, and usually they're shoehorning us in between votes and other things, and you're one of 10 people that day. Some of the best meetings we've had, though, because these members of Congress, usually on weekends, at least a week, a month, they're usually just sort of hanging out in their district, and they have an office in their district, and you can set up a meeting where you go in, and sometimes you may be the only meeting they have that day. And we've put together, you know, I know that in Texas with Representative Sessions, who's become one of poker's real friends here, who didn't understand or really know about our issue. You know, we had a meeting where Cloney Gallen, Robert Williamson, and some other members of the PPA who were in his district went to his district office and had a nice leisurely conversation with him. So certainly in district meetings, you can call up your local congressional office and you can go in and you can make your voice heard. That's what these members of Congress are in district for, is to have meetings with their constituents. I think that's a great way to do it. Certainly supporting the Poker PAC, you know, and there are links to that on the PPA website. The Poker PAC is a political action committee that's raising money. We're trying to raise upwards of $500,000, and a political action committee can make donations up to $10,000 to various members of Congress. And you know, quite frankly, that's part of the game in Washington. You know, these members of Congress need that support to get reelected, and the Poker PAC is going to be there creating friends and building, you know, a coalition over the years. And so that's certainly a big way that you can support. And then, you know, look, I think the most important thing, though, is to be a member and to be at the ready. When you get that alert email and we need you to call somebody, usually your member of Congress, within a given time frame, usually within a day or two, because there's a key vote coming up, there's a key committee hearing coming up. I think that's really when it's important to act.
Okay. Well, that's all I have for you. I really appreciate you coming to talk with us about this.
My pleasure.
And thank you guys for watching the Online Zone on Card Player TV.